Guess what time it is? It's Gainz-Thirty. If you know me, you know I love talking about making gains, so I'm inspired to make this podcast about just that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mitchell Porras. If you know me just from social media, you might know me as Mitchell Gains. I'm very passionate about making gains and teaching others how to do that, so here I am making a podcast to teach you all about making gains. Making gains is just a term that I use for progressing in your fitness, and that could be so many different types of things. It could be in weightlifting, in running, even in losing weight. In my eyes, that's gains because that's progress. So, gains just means progress. So, when I use that, just understand I'm not talking about gaining weight necessarily, but I'm just talking about progressing in your fitness. Here's a little bit more about me. I study kinesiology in school. I'm currently working to get my bachelor's degree. I transferred to San Francisco State University out of Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz. And when I was in community college, I got 3 associate's degrees, kind of on accident. I just had a ton of units, and they said I can get all these degrees. So I have one in communications, health sciences, and kinesiology. While I was at Cabrillo, I took a nutrition class with our upcoming guest, Denise Russo. She was my professor. And that class really sparked a passion for not only fitness, but nutrition. Since then, I've studied nutrition on my own. I've taken what I know from my kinesiology studies and finding credible resources on the internet to do my own research regarding nutrition, because that's an interest of mine. What you can expect from this podcast is a variety of different ways that you can optimize your performance so that you can make more gains. This episode specifically is about nutrition. We're going to talk a lot about what you eat before and after your workout to get the most out of your training. Without further ado, I want to introduce Denise Russo. She was my nutrition teacher at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California. She's taught me so much. She's a registered dietitian. She's gotten her master's degree, and she's definitely certified to talk about all of this type of stuff.
Oh, hi. Hi, Mitchell. Great to be here with you. I still remember you and that whole group of students so fondly. So really appreciate the work that went in my class. My name is Denise, as Mitchell said. I did my undergrad at Cal Poly. I've always had an interest in sports nutrition. So went to San Jose State for my master's degree. And was able to integrate in some of the exercise physiology classes to develop my understanding of sports nutrition and sport performance. I've been teaching for 25 years. I guess that's, yeah. And I'm a fitness professional as well.
So I had a conversation with my friend Casey about, what sorts of things people should know in order to optimize their performance as far as eating goes. But I have some further questions for you to help kind of tie that together. So, macronutrient wise, in terms of carbs, fats, and proteins, what should a pre-workout meal look like? Like what do I eat before I work out to perform at my best?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So one of the things we have to ask is, who are we looking at? If we're looking at just the average recreational athlete, they're
Mhm.
going out to do the treadmill for 45 minutes or, a long, hard walk for an hour. There's really nothing special that they need to do to meet their nutritional needs before their activity. Drink some water, stay hydrated, bring water with you if you know you're going to be sweating and it's a hot environment and you're
Mhm.
working at low to moderate intensity. Nothing particularly important for most people who are active. Now, when we're talking about elite athletes, competitive athletes, the demand that they put on their body, they're going to be working for longer than 60 minutes and working at moderate to high intensity much of that time. Then we want to make sure that there's an adequate base of nutrient, of macronutrient to sustain their sport. For our endurance athletes, carbohydrates are going to be critical because, of course, we have concerns about hitting the wall, as we say. If
And
you
what's
run,
hitting the wall?
Hitting the wall is running out of carbohydrate, stored carbohydrate in your
Mhm.
muscles. So that's muscle glycogen. Glycogen is
Uh-huh.
that carbohydrate storage form. And we are limited in the amount of carbohydrate we can store in our body. So if we run out, we lose our ability to perform at a high intensity.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
So that's, I always talk about it. You might remember this, Mitchell, from our nutrition class. I always give the analogy of a bonfire. And when you are making a bonfire, you have that big log that smolders and releases a steady rate of kind of consistent heat, but not that strong spark that gets you warm got out of the ocean at
I
10 o'clock
see.
at night.
So the
So
carbohydrates are kind of like splashing a little gasoline on the fire, if you
that's
will. I
exactly
see.
it. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have that, that log
Mm-hmm.
smolders slowly, but you never get that high intensity, that big heat, that release of
Yeah.
energy.
So the log under the fire is kind of like the fats. Like that's just kind of our baseline, what's keeping us going, but gotta add a little kindling or gasoline to get it firing up, you know.
Absolutely. You're
I
going to
remember
chase
that
down.
analogy. That was a good
You
one,
remember
yeah.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah. You chase down someone on a breakaway, you're going to be using mostly carbohydrate as you go super fast.
I
So
see.
carbs become really important for especially the endurance athletes. We tend to overlook the strength training athletes sometimes, not thinking so much about their carb usage. But actually, if they're doing higher reps, max rep, you're done in less than 10 seconds and you don't have to worry about the amount of carb that you used. But if you're
Hmm.
doing a higher rep training day, or any kind of training that you're just continually kind of working and your heart rate's up, carbohydrates are a concern then too, even more
Definitely.
than eating protein before meals.
Hmm. So the protein before the training isn't the biggest deal. And that's better for post-workout, huh?
Super important post
I
workout.
see.
And there are different studies, but that give different results, of course.
Hmm.
But in general, what we see in the research literature is the carbohydrate becomes the most relevant part in your pre-workout meal. That doesn't mean don't eat protein, and it
Yeah.
might, for those strength athletes, a little bit of protein prior to, probably in the form of a liquid form. You don't want anything
Hmm.
that's going to sit in your stomach.
It's a lot to digest. It takes a while to break that down.
It does. It
Yeah,
does. So, yeah, and that's a good point too. When are you eating before that workout? Is it 2 hours before that workout?
that's
You
a good
can,
point.
right? You
So
can
when
eat.
when should I eat that pre-workout meal? Like, is there a certain time that works for everybody, or is it like how do I know?
I think that you brought up a great point, Mitchell, because that individualization, people often say, what should I eat before my workout? And I say, what sits in your stomach well and
Yeah.
allows you to perform well? That's different for
Hmm.
me than for you.
Okay.
But if you could eat about what I call them sprint carbohydrates, something that's going to get in really quickly and be absorbed 30 minutes before the meal,
Hmm.
and that's not always the most healthful of foods because it might be a carbohydrate, either a fruit, which is pretty quick to get in, or it might be a more refined carbohydrate
Hmm.
where there's less fiber and fat and protein included. So that can get absorbed quickly.
Could you give us some examples of like refined carbohydrates? Like what types of foods are those versus something that's more of a complex carbohydrate?
Yeah. So any kind of I call them a lot of times the white carbohydrates. So maybe you have a
Hmm.
half a bagel before, or you have some crackers that aren't whole wheat crackers before.
Yeah.
So I find that now I see that the athletes eat all kinds of things that sit well in their stomach, and sometimes not the most healthful of things. But trying to find those foods that don't add a lot of extra unnecessary calories, but get absorbed quickly. So those types of things. Cereal actually is a great, like if you're not eating a whole grain, Cheerios, for example, would be a
Hmm.
pretty quickly absorbed type of cereal that you can maybe have before a meal,
Let's see. It's funny
before
you
a
say
workout.
that. I know a lot of bodybuilders who really like fruity pebbles before they do their workouts. I've never understood the hype of it. I was more of a cocoa pebbles kind of guy, but apparently everyone likes these fruity pebbles before they train. It just you digest it like that and you're ready to go.
That's
But
exactly what I'm talking about. And I
yeah,
don't know how Fruity Pebbles became so famous, but I know when, or so well known for that. But when I was in college and bodybuilding, it was baby food.
really.
Yes.
You
So
know,
we,
it's funny you say that because I've been at the store before and I was looking at the pouches of baby food and I was like, I wish they made that for adults in like a larger package. I was like, that looks so convenient to eat and to get my calories.
right. Well, applesauce. I mean, it's,
Hmm.
very similar. So yeah, there's always, it seems to be different things become popular at different times. So now it's Fruity Pebbles, then it was baby food. Both of those foods, though, will get absorbed rapidly and provide a lot of
Hmm.
carbohydrate to help keep that blood glucose level up and keep the carbohydrates available to the body to perform.
Yeah, I recall a time in high school football when I was on the JV team. There was a 7-Eleven right near our school, and we would always go and get Slurpees before practice, and it would just be this big icy sugar drink. And I look back, I'm like, that was so unhealthy, but at the same time, it was probably pretty effective to drink it immediately before practice because I had all this sugar ready to burn off.
Yeah, absolutely. You may not have needed quite that quantity,
Yeah.
but but that is definitely, what we're looking at. And that's sometimes there's a conflict in sport nutrition and nutrition for health that, people, marathon runners will be eating those chews through
Hmm.
their, runs. Well, that's just sugar. And that
Yeah.
is counter to what we recommend to the general population. But when we're looking at fueling the body and we're looking at carb and looking at foods specifically that it get in quickly, they tend to be those foods that fall into what we, deem as sugar or added sugar.
Yeah. So before we go into post-workout nutrition, what about like intra-workout? It sounds like you're saying like the carbohydrates are effective to eat during the workout too.
Yeah. So again, which type of athlete are you? What's your
Hmm.
level of intensity, particularly over time? How long are you going to be going? When we look at endurance athletes, and those are the athletes at greatest risk for hitting the wall, though we recommend that they are consuming carbohydrates throughout their workout, and with that, we ask them to hydrate also.
Hmm.
And so we can put those two things, the carbohydrate and the fluid, together in the form of a combination of sport chews and then perhaps a sport drink that is carbohydrate containing.
Hmm.
And so you're going to ask your endurance athlete to be consuming something every 15 to 30 minutes. They're
Okay.
going to
Wow.
eat 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour,
Hmm.
and they learn what that amount is in their training.
So I've
So,
never run a marathon or a long
uh-huh.
race, but I've seen sometimes they have like little Gatorade stands along the way. That must be the explanation for that, right? Not just to treat the
Yep,
runner.
yep, absolutely. And
Okay.
you'll find sometimes they have pretzels and they'll have fruit slices, things that can get absorbed pretty quickly, but the
Yeah,
runner can continue. Super important for anyone thinking of doing that type of event to practice in training,
I see.
because and the very specific brand that you're going to use, because even switching brands, if you're not careful with label reading, you might think you're getting a certain amount of carbohydrate and then end up
Mhm.
short.
I
And you'll
see.
feel that in your race.
Yeah, I used to always really like to bring a piece of fruit to the gym when I
Uh-huh.
would train, because I would train for like 2 hours sometimes, and just like
Yeah.
I would get hungry by the end of it, and about midway through, I'd have like an orange or apple or something, and it would just kind of give me a little pick me up to help me finish the workout.
Yeah. And again, I think we overlook the importance of carbohydrates in strength training athletes who are doing what
Hmm.
you're doing, training for long periods of time. um, Depends on how much rest and how hard you're working. I know sometimes you see people in the gym for 2 hours, but they really only do 30 minutes of workout.
Yeah,
um,
long rest in between,
yeah,
and yeah.
but if you're working pretty consistently, it's reasonable that you would need to replenish during that activity as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about post-workout meals. So it sounds like we need a lot of carbs before and maybe even during if it's an extended period of exercise and it's pretty vigorous. What should we eat after?
Yeah, so that recovery meal is really important for building muscle and allowing the body to repair from any damage that has occurred. Which, if you're trying to become more fit, you should always be sort of challenging your body to grow and adapt. Um, Carbs are still important post exercise, but this is where protein has the biggest impact in regard to what where you want to make sure you have that. So people get really hung up on the role of protein in muscle repair, and it's needed. But what we need to recognize about carbohydrates is when you eat carbohydrates, your body has to respond to bring that carbohydrate down by releasing a hormone called insulin. And
Hmm.
insulin helps to bring all of those nutrients into the cell, but they also stop some pathways that break down protein. So when you put those two things together, what you want to do is eat something that allows that insulin to come up. That's your carbohydrate. And then make sure protein is there so you can maximize the repair that happens after that workout.
Oh, okay.
So,
So they go hand in hand. We want protein and carbs afterwards.
yeah, that
Oh, okay.
carbohydrate I think of the carbohydrate as being the friend to the protein. How do I get
Mm-hmm.
all that protein in? I make sure that I make the cell as permeable as I can. And I do that with carbohydrate.
Okay. So should I be having carbohydrates with every meal that I have protein, like in order to help like absorb that?
I would say for most athletes, since the carbohydrate need is so great anyway, that yeah, always including a carbohydrate with your
Okay.
meals. That should really be the foundation for the diet of most athletes.
Okay. So could you give me a good example of a post-workout meal that has carbs and protein in it? Like what would you eat after you work out?
Yeah. So one of the things to remember with that post workout meal is it doesn't have to be a large meal. It could be a snack. It often would be. Um, but it needs to come in within 30 minutes. If you want to maximize the repair,
Mm-hmm.
it's like finish working out and then eat something. So it's not uncommon for an athlete to say, I don't have an appetite afterwards. And it doesn't,
I
you know,
totally agree. I
right?
feel that, yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Especially
I don't
after
want,
running, I feel like everything's shaken up in there and I just need to lay on the floor for a minute before I eat.
it's so true. It's like, oh, I just worked really hard and I'm sweaty and gross and nothing. I don't feel like eating at all. So again, it goes to that. Okay, what can you tolerate? This is where, not that I'm promoting this, and we could have a whole different conversation about dairy foods, but this is
Mhm.
where chocolate milk became, and it's the weirdest thing. But they're like, oh my gosh, when we do the research on chocolate milk, it helps that whole process that we're
It's
talking
got the
about
carbs and the protein in a
because it and it
convenient
has
liquid form.
and it has to be the chocolate milk because they add the sugar. That's where they get the carbohydrate up high enough. So
Yeah.
it's this whole funny thing where you're like, wait, you're telling me to drink chocolate milk? Yes, I am. Um, but I but anything, so a lot of the sport supplements that are for repair you're looking at if you look on the label of your supplement, you want at least double the grams of carb as there is of protein. So if it
Okay.
has 10 grams of protein in a serving, you want anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of carbohydrate. That's the
Okay,
ratio.
wow.
Okay.
It's a lot
So
of
1 gram,
carbs,
it is. Yeah.
but that's the appropriate time to eat them right after.
Yeah. So, but for those people who are like, I don't want to pay for a supplement and I'm not going to drink chocolate milk because I don't do dairy. And again, like I said, that's a whole nother conversation. And I may not even disagree with that. Um, but I think that, I've seen a lot of athletes like pack a half a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in their workout bag or bring it to the field.
Mhm.
Trail mix. I'm a huge, huge advocate for trail mix because you get all kinds of good things in that, including the carb, the protein. So those types of things that are a little bit easier to digest and that you can carry on the sideline, that's what I would recommend
Okay,
for.
so you're saying it's very important to get these nutrients in as soon after the workout as you can, and that means having something very convenient to eat right after you work out would be a good idea.
Absolutely. This is where
Okay.
sport bars sometimes,
Yeah, the protein bars and whatnot. Yeah.
yep. Make sure, again, just look at that. You want at least double to 4 times the amount of
Yeah.
carbohydrate as the protein, or you could have the bar and a piece of fruit would be another way to add in some more
Yeah.
carbohydrate.
I've looked at these protein bars sometimes and they have a lot of sugar in them, and I typically avoid them for that reason. But now I'm thinking if I ate that post-workout, that would actually be pretty good. That'd be a great time to have something sugary because it would actually be effective to do that.
That's where I say that the health recommendations and the sport nutrition recommendations don't always match up, right? There's
Uh-huh.
sometimes that disconnect between those two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you could, instead of the bar, you could do the trail mix and the fruit, and that would give you the same amount of carbohydrate without the added sugar ingredients
Yeah,
that you see.
I see.
Um, but it's,
It might
you
not
have
be
to
as
eat it.
convenient.
Right.
Yeah, I see. Well, that actually leads me to the next question. Is there a difference between eating for optimal athletic performance and eating for general health?
Yeah. It's such a great question because when you're asking an athlete to take in 7 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram, I mean, that ends up being,
It's a lot.
you know, yeah, that could easily be 1,800 calories from carbohydrate alone for a female athlete. You work with female athletes, like, I don't eat more than that as it is. Like, that's my whole day. And I think, well, then you're under eating. And so you might
Yeah.
be underperforming, but it's a tremendous amount of carbohydrate when you break it down by grams per kilogram.
Yeah, I just did the math on a calculator, and that's if I did I think it was 8 or 9 grams per kilogram, I'd be eating about 700 grams of carbs a day.
Did you
That's a
multiply that?
lot. That's quite a
Yeah,
bit
multiply that by 4. Look at how many, I mean, you're looking at 2,800 calories
just
from
from
carb.
carbs. Yeah, that's
That
a lot.
doesn't,
That's a lot of potatoes.
that's a lot of potatoes. Yeah. Hey, that's a great food actually, because they break down pretty quickly, but they also keep you full. They
Yeah,
have one of the highest, what we call satiety levels.
yeah.
Um, so
I eat
that's
a
a,
lot of sweet potatoes. I'm a big
yeah.
fan of them because I can get these giant purple ones, tons of
Mm-hmm.
antioxidants,
Yes.
tons of carbs. They actually have a lot more fiber than a normal potato, and I don't know, I think it's one of like the most important foods I have in my diet is those purple sweet potatoes.
Yeah. So that's a great example of two different choices of a similar food and then picking one that has higher phytochemicals,
Hmm.
antioxidants, it just has a higher nutrient distribution than maybe the other form. And so when we talk about your original question of, eating for health and eating for sport, and that idea that there's this disconnect, it's just for the athlete to get in all that carb in particular that they need. They're going to have to make really thoughtful choices. And it's not unlikely that some of those carbohydrates are going to come from added sugars,
Yeah, definitely.
and you know, in general, I recommend we limit added sugars. There's some evidence that not only do they add extra calories, but they affect the bacteria in your gut, that gut
Ooh, that's a good
microbiome.
point.
Yeah, in a way that's not beneficial to long-term health. Athletes tend to eat for today, and they're not worried as much about the risk for Alzheimer's 30 years from now. But
I see.
it does all, if we can try to encourage athletes to make that choice more often, the sweet potato versus the, refined other carbohydrate, that probably is a win-win. Doesn't hurt their athletic performance and helps their long-term health goals as well.
Yeah. I always think about Gatorade, for example. It's like that's something that could be a really good tool for an elite level athlete or maybe even someone who's a sub-elite athlete. But for someone who's new to exercise, the Gatorade just might not be that necessary. It's kind of just an extra sugar that you're consuming. And if you're not burning all of that off, it's really not going to be that beneficial for you.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that. That's one of the things we talk about in classes. There's no reason to ever see somebody on the treadmill with their Gatorade, right?
Seems
Like, very,
counterproductive. You're burning
yeah.
calories, you're on the treadmill, but you're consuming them at the same time. It's
Do
yeah.
you remember, we talk about, I think where it gets abused the most is in kids sports. I don't know if
Oh yeah,
you,
I don't know
we
if they
talked
need
about
that.
this, like the kid on the soccer field, the 10-year-old playing soccer, and then at halftime they have, fruit and their Gatorade. And then after the game, they have a cookie or a donut or whatever the parent of the day brought. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, your kid just ate more calories by going to their soccer game than they burned playing their
Yeah,
soccer game. And so I think that's such a great point, that those sports drinks play a really important role. Like when I run a marathon, I can't finish a half marathon or a marathon without taking in those liquid carbohydrates. I just can't eat enough of those chews. And I have
yeah.
bonked before. I've hit the wall and it's not
Hmm.
pretty. Um, but when we're talking about something like kids or people going at a lower intensity or for not more than 90 minutes, there's really water. Just drink water. That's really all you need.
Can't beat water.
No,
Best liquid on the planet.
absolutely. And it could be water in the form of water, or like I'm drinking in the form of an herbal tea right now.
Yeah.
Um,
And
it
a lot
doesn't
of
have to.
food has water in it, like fruits and vegetables, tons of water.
Absolutely. So drink that fluid that's water containing, and then we get some from our food as well.
Uh,
Yeah.
Do you think the macronutrient distribution is going to be a lot different for an athlete compared to just someone trying to be healthy? Like, how is that going to differ?
Yeah, protein definitely is higher. So for the general population, when we do it as a percentage, we'll say, 10 to 35% of your diet should be protein. For an athlete, the minimum is 12. So we bump up the bottom end a little bit. Athletes, the average person walking around that's not athletic needs not even a gram of protein per kilogram. Whereas an elite athlete, especially a strength athlete, they need almost double that.
That's such a
So
big difference too,
it
and
is.
I think it makes it really hard for people to figure out like how much protein they need.
I
This was
think
this was exactly what I was talking about with Casey. We were like talking about how much protein do I need, and then we just came to the conclusion it's highly individual, and you kind of have to figure out what works for you and yourself.
Yeah, I think always that we can look at any of the numbers and the recommendations and the research, but we always have to put that layer on. But what works for your body? Um, when we look, I don't know if you remember when we did the self nutrient analysis, when people analyzed their diets, just my students, right? When they analyze their diets, a lot of them already meet their sport need for protein because as a society, we just eat so much more protein than we typically need. And even my vegetarians and vegans would be surprised that they're like, wow, I'm eating way more protein than what I need for my RDA. And I'm like, yeah, it's really not that hard to get it because it's ubiquitous in our food supply. Um, but for an athlete, I would recommend always checking in with somebody and having them just do the math and sample meal plan that for you so you have an idea of the grams of protein per day. So anyway, it's a little bit more protein, a little bit more carbohydrate than the non-athlete, and then that means if those two things go up, fat then is what goes down.
Okay, so the general population might eat more or less fat. Well,
The general population will have more room for fat in their diet because if you get 100%, and carb is, if you're eating them, carb at 70% because you're an athlete or 65% and your protein is at 20%, now you're at 85%. That's not that much room for fat. That's only
okay, so the
15%.
athletes will typically be eating a smaller percentage of fats
Yes.
compared to the general population who is not an
Hmm.
athlete. They'd be eating a higher percentage of their calories from fats.
Yes.
And they might even be
In
eating less fats than the athlete because the athlete's going to be eating more calories, but the percentage of what they're
yes.
eating might be higher in the
Yes.
fat category.
Absolutely. If you look at grams or servings, that's different than percentage. So that's a great point. When you're a non-athlete and you sit with your athlete friend and they're eating, they should be eating more food than you.
Definitely.
And it might even look like there's more fat right on their plate, but as a
Yeah,
percentage of their diet, it's going to be less. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good
I
point.
see. Okay. Are there any other things that athletes might do that aren't quite as healthy as what a typical person should be doing for their health?
Um, it's funny. I mean, sometimes when I look at my athletes, because of this idea of eating carbohydrates before their meal that are what we call sprint, they might be making less healthful choices there. They might eat more
Okay.
snacky foods and foods that we say aren't as nutrient dense.
Yes.
So, as much as possible, try to pick the more healthful option of the food. But I do think there's some wiggle room for athletes that,
I
just to get
see.
enough carbohydrates in.
Yeah, so due to the athlete's calorie intake and their calorie needs, they might have a little bit more room for junk food and they might be able to use that as a tool that helps them achieve their goal. Whereas
Absolutely.
in the typical population, there's not so much room for that kind of junk food.
Yeah. That doesn't always make me so popular with the parent group when I speak to, when they invite me to speak to teams about what their athletes should be eating. And I'm like, well, if you want to have some Skittles before your workout, and the parents are like, no. And again, if I could get them to eat fruit, that would be better. But keeping it realistic, and giving that little bit of room to the athlete, I think they have some
Yeah,
room for that.
I
And I
see.
I think the other thing that we should mention is, especially, there's always the risk for eating disorders, and it's a greater risk in the athlete population. And so really trying to encourage athletes to be thoughtful about their food choices, but not to get so hyper focused about them.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
tough balance to make. 'Cause
mm,
I noticed that as an athlete myself, like there's a fine line between being too obsessive about like my macronutrients and just having freedom to eat what I want. And takes time to find that balance and find what's good for you, you know?
yeah, weighing yourself every day isn't something that needs to be done. Um, what we said in our class is, do your pants fit, right? So
That's a
I
good way to
think,
look at it,
yeah.
yeah.
So that we try to, stay away from a scale, but if you notice that everything's getting more snug and it's not just because your muscles are getting bigger, but it's
Mhm.
around your waist, that
Yeah.
might be an indication that we need to, check the calorie level.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, I think that would be something for athletes is that. And then also they're a very vulnerable population, not only for eating disorders, but for supplementation. And I really just encourage people, to just check, do the research, see not
Yeah.
only if it works, but I know the beet juice thing, and then nitric acid. That is a supplement that has been shown to be effective to shave, like 100th off of your sprint time. So
It's not much of a significant change if you ask me.
Oh, so I think too, when athletes are looking to supplements, and what the current trend is, creatine tends to not to get off on the supplement track too much, but creatine is the one that seems to come up in the research over and over again as being really helpful for helping athletes to build strength. Um, but that, you have to really look at what is your goal, and is it in the literature? Do we see that it really does that? And is it significant? Because for me, as a distance runner, shaving 100th off of my time makes no difference at all, right? It wouldn't
Yeah,
make sense to take
definitely.
the supplement. So I think that that would be another area where I just think athletes need really good guidance and need to be taught how to do some of that research on their own.
I totally agree. There's a lot of supplements out there that are pretty questionable, and there's so few of them that are actually effective and safe.
Right.
So, yeah, some research definitely needs to be done before taking any supplements.
Absolutely. Yeah. Safety and efficacy. Those are two words that are very common in this year, 2021. Is it safe and is it effective?
Yeah,
And we want things that are both. Yep. Absolutely.
definitely. Yeah, so what I'm taking away from this is that if you're an athlete, or you should be an athlete because you'll have more room to eat some junk food in your life.
Huh. Maybe don't promote that as my message.
That's my message. If you work out, you might have some room for some Skittles in your diet. Yeah.
I have always joked about that. I'm like, hey, I work
Mhm.
hard so I can eat some
Yeah.
of those fun foods so that
It's good to have them in moderation, and I think by working out more, it's like you can have that moderation without having as many side effects from it.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
overall, yeah, don't eat junk food. But if you're gonna, might want to work out a little bit more, and it'll kind of balance out.
Yeah, my memory of you is you're not a big junk food eater, actually.
No, not too much. I'm not a big
Yeah.
fan of it. I do a lot of my own meal prepping, and I don't like to eat out that often. It's just I like to make my own foods, know what's in it, and keep it nice and simple.
Yeah, I remember that about your eating, that you were a pretty clean, what they call a clean eater. So,
Yeah,
it's always commendable, but I do believe in having a little fun, and
yeah,
athletes get a little more room to do that because of their calorie usage.
yeah. I mean, I do eat junk food sometimes. I'm not like strict clean 100% of the time. I probably follow the 80-20 rule, maybe closer to 90-10, but I do have some junk food. I do enjoy my bean chips and bagels occasionally.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I love that. And I love that you said the 80-20 rule, because that's my rule, right? Like,
Hmm.
um,
Did I
I,
learn
th-
that from you? It was somewhere in my
yeah,
brain. Yep.
I'm like, oh, I love that I planted that seed
That's
and
good. It
it
was a good
stuck.
seed to plant. Yeah.
Yeah, I say it a lot in my classes, 80-20, 80-20. So,
Yeah. And I hear other people talking about that too. So maybe you've spread that knowledge
oh,
around.
if that's my one good deed in the world, then that 25 years of being an educator will have really paid off. I've spread the seed of the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, my last question was, what is the most important dietary recommendation you have for the general public? If you had one thing to share with everyone, what would it be? I'm assuming that may have been the 80-20 rule, but I'm gonna have you choose another one besides that since we
Okay.
already got that point out there.
Okay, so in addition to the 80-20 rule, I think really when we look at what's happening with the population in general, and our food supply, uh, gosh, making me narrow it down to one because I have two. So I'm going to share two
You can
anyway.
share too, of course. The
Okay.
more the merrier.
I think that, the more you can focus on foods that are not processed, the better. And so, uh, just trying to eat foods in their whole form, thinking of that 80-20 rule, and picking things that can be, we have to always be aware of the cost of food, and that processed foods are oftentimes less expensive, unfortunately. And that's a whole farm bill, nutrition politics. Like, I hope we get that shift someday, that we can make an organic apple would be cheaper than a Twinkie, for
Oh, if
example.
only.
If only. I know that's a pretty hard one. So, but eating foods in their natural form, as much as possible. And then I think the other one, because of course I could talk about plant-based and etc. But I think the other thing is just that seems to be universal, in our society, is portion size. So I think being aware of portion size, eating from a smaller plate. My mantra that I'd give to clients who were trying to, control weight was, more is more is not better. And so 10 bites of that very highly caloric dessert or whatever isn't any better than just 5 bites. It's just more. So, those are the little seeds that if people can think, I'm going to eat that food because I love it, and even though it's not the most healthful food, I'm just going to eat a smaller portion of it, and then you can still enjoy it within that kind of 80-20 rule. Keeps going back to that though, Mitchell.
Yeah,
It keeps going back to the 80-20 rule.
moderation and balance. It's super
Yeah,
important.
yeah,
Yeah, I really like what you mentioned there about just like the avoiding processed foods as much as you can. Like I always like to tell people, the closer you can get your food to nature, the better. When humans start to alter it and modify it in all these different ways, that's when it starts to become less healthful, in my opinion.
yeah,
And I'm not saying everything that humans alter gets messed up, but a lot of the time, when we start combining foods and morphing them into these snacks, and that's when it starts to become less healthy, I think. So
yeah,
definitely avoiding the
absolutely.
processed foods as much as you can, at least,
I
is
mean,
great
yeah,
advice for the general public.
I think Michael Pollan said it so well, right? Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Like,
It's a good
that
quote.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of my favorite all-time quotes when it comes to nutrition um, is that, because it's so simple. And then if it were that simple, we wouldn't have the amount of chronic disease and obesity and everything that we have in society. So, never undermining that behavior modification, for athletes and non-athletes, is not easy. And so getting people to make those changes is just, can be really hard. Uh,
Yeah.
and then latching onto those small things. That was fun.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any more questions for you, but I
Okay.
think you got a lot of good information out there for the people to listen to. And I really appreciate you coming on here. I got to learn a thing or two. You got to jog my memory on some of the nutrition, and you got some good information out there for the people. So thank you for being on here, and
Yeah,
I
no,
really appreciate that.
thank you so much. And it was an honor to be asked. It's, I really appreciate making that connection with students and then watching them go out into the world and, share what they've learned and expanding on their learning. So really, thank you for asking me to come.
The main thing I want you all to take away from this interview is that carbs are not the enemy. Carbs are your friend. They are very important for fueling our workouts as well as helping us recover from our workouts. Denise said it first. We should be eating carbohydrates before we train and carbohydrates after we train, along with some protein. We should be consuming adequate carbohydrates throughout the day, as well as moderate amounts of protein to facilitate recovery. If you're looking to perform your best, it's essential that you are eating plenty of carbohydrates. We go back and forth about how we can eat junk food and still optimize our performance by utilizing those simple carbohydrates before we train. However, it should be noted that the carbohydrates with more fiber are far more healthy for you. And if you're looking for overall health and longevity, eating these carbohydrates with fiber, such as sweet potatoes, grains, and legumes, are a much better choice than the junk food. These things have fiber, and me and Casey will discuss with you what fiber does in just a few moments in the next interview. We also discussed the role of protein, and we came to the conclusion that everybody's protein intake is going to be slightly different. It's highly individual, so in order to know what your protein intake is, you'll have to be doing a little bit of experimenting and trial and error with yourself. Casey and I will also be talking about that in our interview, so stay tuned. Today I have Casey Stroosma with us. Casey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm a personal trainer down in San Diego. We went to school together, me and Mitchell, and did personal training together up at San Francisco State. And then I graduated with a degree in nutrition and dietetics and an emphasis in community foods and nutrition. And then in the exercise realm, I've got my certified personal trainer certification, and then certified corrective exercise specialist.
So here's my first question I have for you, Casey. What does an optimal diet for athletes look like?
Absolutely, man. There's like definitely a lot of different aspects to that question. So we could spend a lot of time talking about this, honestly.
Yeah.
I would say, for like any type of like power athlete, so like a sprinter or like a Olympic weightlifter, like that type of like power, where you're kind of short burst versus long duration, like a mile run. You're gonna want to have like a higher protein diet for sure.
And how does that protein intake compare between the active individual and a
Mhm.
sedentary individual? Do they need
Yeah.
the same amount?
No, yeah. So it's going to be, the less active you are, the less protein you're going to need. And I
Hmm.
think that's probably why, now that I'm like just thinking out loud about this, like I think that's probably why when I've worked with people in the personal training realm, I work with people who used to be sedentary and then they start seeing me 3 times a week and they're not sedentary anymore.
I see.
So I generally have to up their protein intake. So that's actually interesting.
Yeah,
Uh,
so they come in to see you and they're eating X amount of protein. Let's say they're eating
yeah.
100 grams a day and they're a 200-pound male, but they were sedentary beforehand, so that 100 grams of protein must have been sufficient, right? But when
Yes.
they come and see you, you got them lifting weights and running sprints and doing whatever,
Yeah.
then they're going to start needing more protein because they're becoming active. What
Exactly.
I'm getting from you.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing about protein that I think people forget about is people think that protein is what gets you big and maybe it'll help your performance. And that is true. But the way that it does it, it's not like like protein's your recovery. Protein's like your
Hmm.
sleep, like, and I think people forget that. They think it's just part of the workout or whatever. But it's a recovery thing. And so by eating more protein, the reason you're increasing your performance is because you're recovering faster
Hmm.
and you're recovering better than if you weren't having the protein to rebuild your tissues and everything that
Yep,
gets cycled through. And so that's why protein's so important with athletes, is it helps your recovery.
definitely,
uh,
definitely.
yeah.
There's a
So
lot that goes into recovery as well, like your sleep and stretching and foam rolling and whatever, but the
absolutely.
protein, you got to have the protein, it's like one of the most important variables in your recovery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, so like you said earlier, or you mentioned, so depending on your activity level, your protein's going to be lower or higher. And I can't remember these exact recommendations, but I believe for a very active individual, they recommended 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight.
Hmm.
Um, and then it gets incrementally less I think for some, for if you're sedentary, I think it's like 1 gram of protein for every 2 kilograms of body
Yeah,
weight per day. And but like I said, I find these recommendations to be a little low.
they are.
Um,
I completely agree with you. That does seem really low, especially for someone like myself. Like I'm
yeah,
eating way more than 1 gram per kilogram. That would only be
absolutely.
like 90 grams of protein. Like that might suffice if I was sedentary, like I got injured and I'm just like laying in bed all day. But
Yeah.
lifting weights 5 days a week, I need like almost closer to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight,
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
even more, like
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, just for everybody on the podcast who doesn't know, like a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So you'd be eating about 50% or well, so I don't know. The classic thing is to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That's sort of like the bodybuilder
yeah,
standard.
that's what Arnold would say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's funny because there's this guy on Instagram, and I know he's on Instagram, whatever, but he's got a PhD in nutrition. His name's Lane Norton. I think you
Oh, I
follow
was
him
just
too.
talking about that guy yesterday. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's awesome, man.
yeah. He's like sort of like the fact check guy of Instagram. He just calls
Yeah.
everyone out. And he's got a couple books out. One of them is called Fat Loss Forever. Now, I've been
Mhm.
reading that book. I'm not all the way through it yet, but he's also got podcasts and YouTube videos and all that. And that guy has been powerlifting and bodybuilding forever. He's got a PhD, keeps up with current news. And he says for a weight loss diet, um, or for like a bodybuilder like type diet, you're going to want to have about a pound or a gram of protein per pound of body weight.
Mhm.
So this is where the recommendations and maybe some of the things I've learned in school, maybe I just didn't get enough in depth. Maybe I needed to get a master's or a PhD to really fully understand. But all the people that I've kind of talked to in the industry or watched their stuff, kept up with what they've been saying, they always say a little more than what the recommendation is. So
Yeah. Because I feel like those recommendations are just like put out there, like, oh, this is how much you need to survive. But
yeah,
there's a big difference between what you need to survive and what you need to build muscle and thrive. Like there's
yeah,
like the minimum and then the upper limit, and I just feel like everyone's protein intake is going to be so different, so individualized. Like you and I, we have pretty similar activity levels, but we probably eat different amounts of protein and it's just what works for our body.
yep, yep,
So I think the idea is that people need to figure out how much protein they need
hmm,
instead of looking for others and be like, hey, how much protein do I need? It's something you
yeah,
kind of got to experiment with and
yes.
figure out for yourself, like, oh, this is how much I need to build muscle. And, you got to track your progress and, look at all the variables and ultimately figure that out for yourself.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, these recommendations are a good ballpark. But yeah, like you said, to really figure it out, uh, a little bit of trial and error is definitely a good way to
Mhm.
go.
So I want to transition this towards carbs and fats now. How are
Okay.
those intakes going to differ among endurance athletes, strength athletes, and sedentary individuals?
Yes.
Because there's like
So
different ratios of macronutrients that we'll need. Like you need certain percentage of fat, certain percentage of carbs, and certain percentage of proteins. So
absolutely.
how is that going to differ among these different types of populations?
So, I kind of use with my clients at the gym, I do use carbs and fats interchangeably. But like I said, these are my clients. They're not clients that are necessarily looking to uh, have peak performance. Most of the time, they're just trying to get in better shape, get a little bit stronger. They're not trying to be that next level performance athlete. For like a sprinter type athlete. So, and when I say type, I just mean anybody who needs short-term power to,
Hmm.
like 100-meter sprint or even a 400-meter sprint, I think
Yeah.
would be the
Anything
cutoff.
under a minute burst, you could
Yes.
say, is a power
Yeah,
athlete.
absolutely. And so for them, I would recommend a higher carb diet.
So these people who are power athletes using that anaerobic pathway for short bursts of energy, they're going to
Mhm.
need more carbohydrates, you say?
Yes. Yeah, because your
Okay.
body has naturally wants to tear apart the carbs first. Your
Hmm.
your fats, your body can can run off fats, and that's where the keto diet comes in. But its preferred energy source is going to be glucose. Once the ATP and creatine and the anaerobic hybrid pathway, once that has been used up, because you can't stay in that anaerobic state forever. That's why we breathe. Your body eventually, it needs to use oxygen to metabolize, generally speaking, glucose, which is what it wants to use as its primary energy source.
Yeah. So if you're a strength or power athlete, you're eating tons of carbs because that's what you're going to burn during your preferred activity. What's the point of eating fats then? Do I need any?
So yeah, you will still need fats because you've got some essential fatty acids like your omega-3s and your omega-6. You need fatty acids. So for your brain is like mostly fat.
Well, think about it too. It's like we're just sitting in this chair right now. What are we burning right now?
Exactly.
To hold up our posture and to breathe and to digest if you have any food in us. We're running off of those fats. It's kind of just like our baseline energy source.
Yeah.
But when we want to pick up the pace for a survival situation, like let's say a bear breaks down my door and I gotta get the hell out of here, I might have to start running and start breaking down those carbs that I have stored in the form of glycogen. But that's just stored and ready for when I need to use it.
Yes. And so the other thing is too, when you've got, once, this is where people talk about carb loading before like a competition.
Ooh, this is a great point.
Yeah. And this goes into even with endurance athletes, especially, is they eat a very high carb meal, maybe a few hours before their competition. And that way they've got a lot of free flowing glucose through their, through their blood. And so the body can just easily pick that up and put it straight to work while they're running or doing whatever they're doing. And so, yeah, there've been some studies where they've kind of tested keto versus like carb. So keto is where you're just using fat as your primary energy source, and basically eliminating carbs. You go into this I believe it's like ketoacidosis or whatever. I don't know. There's like all these.
I think that's the term. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're basically just using free flowing fatty acids known as ketones in place of glucose. But basically they've tested some power athletes against the keto diet, putting these same athletes on keto diet and seeing how they perform. And the ones performing with carbs tend to do better.
That's what I've heard too.
Yeah.
So it seems like we've come to the consensus that endurance athletes and strength athletes both need plenty of carbohydrates to perform at their best, and also moderate amounts of fats and pretty high amounts of proteins compared to sedentary individuals. But how many carbs do you think a sedentary individual needs relative to your typical athlete?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a decrease. Like, I mean, they're going to need less carbs, but they're going to need less of everything. A sedentary person isn't burning as many calories. And when I say need, if this sedentary person is underweight, then they're going to need to eat in a surplus. So then they would need to eat more calories than they're burning. But generally speaking, in the Western realm, when someone's sedentary, they're probably not very active. They're probably not having a very hard time getting the nutrients they need. And a lot of times they're overeating. And so with that, you're going to need less carbs, you're going to need less fat, and you're going to need less protein. And I wouldn't recommend anybody choose to be sedentary, because it's been kind of proven time and time again that being active, having an active lifestyle is ideal.
Yes.
And so, but so they're going to need less protein, less fat, less carbs, because they're burning less protein, fat, and carbs.
So for the sedentary individual, it's not really about the macronutrients. They should just be looking more at like the calories they're putting in, and maybe not even counting their calories, but it's just kind of a matter of how much food they're taking in overall.
Yes. But I would recommend to anybody who's never counted their calories before to try it for a week. And I
Oh,
think
dude, I agree, man.
yeah. I mean, it's surprising when you realize, there's sometimes people who can't lose weight, and they're overweight, for example, and then they track their calories and they're actually eating a really small amount of calories and they're
Yeah,
still not able to lose weight. And there's only two options at that point. If your goal is to lose weight, you can either eat less or try to burn more and eat the same
yeah,
amount. And that's a big thing with people who try to lose weight. They just try to eat less, but their metabolism will adapt to that lower caloric load. And
yeah,
and then they'll be stuck in this decreasing calories, slowing down their metabolism,
yeah.
basically
That's a
just
scary
making life
thing.
more difficult.
That makes things really difficult.
Hmm.
Like imagine you're trying to lose weight, but you can only eat 1,500 calories a day. It's like, I think the starting point for those individuals is like starting to actually eat more, like it seems
Exactly.
like contradicting, but like you kind of got to start eating more, building your
Yep.
metabolism, obviously
And
eating more of healthy foods, like not chips and other junk food, but like increasing their clean calories so that their metabolism can speed up so that you can then put them in a proper calorie deficit where they're not eating like a completely restrictive amount, like 1,000 calories
exactly.
or something.
Exactly. And they always say the best diet is the one you can stick to.
Yep,
So,
I agree.
and so putting someone on a highly restrictive diet where they're miserable is not going to create lasting
It's
change.
not a sustainable approach. I see it
No.
so often. It's crazy. But I liked what you were saying about how everyone should at least try counting their calories and their macros once. Like I highly recommend MyFitnessPal. That was the first thing, the first calorie tracker I ever used, and to this day I still use it, but I don't use it all the time. Like I use it occasionally, just see where I'm at, and I try to keep my diet consistent. But for people who don't understand the macronutrients and where they get them, using a tool like MyFitnessPal could be so important because then they can begin to understand like, oh, this food has these type of macronutrients. Like this steak has a lot of fats and proteins, and this chicken doesn't have much fat, just protein, and these potatoes have no protein or fats, just carbs. They'll begin to
Yeah.
pick up on those things, and then they'll begin to have an idea of what they should be putting in their body. So I think it's such a good start for people to try and do that, even if it's not like a lifelong thing, maybe trying it for a week and seeing what they usually eat. But yeah, I highly recommend everyone to try that at least once in their life.
I agree. I agree. Because it's eye-opening for sure. And yeah, it's funny how you say that, like you look at a potato and you're like, well, that's all carbs. I'm at the point now in my life where I'm like, oh man, I'm hungry right now. What do I need? Well, I need to get a carb. I need to
Hmm.
get some protein, and I probably need a fruit or a vegetable.
Yep.
And that's another big thing I want to touch on too, is though it's not a macronutrient in the sense that it gives you energy, fiber is a really important nutrient.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
yeah, and that's going to be found basically if you track your fiber, I believe it comes out to about, I think it was like 7 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories you eat. I
Hmm.
think that's the ballpark. I can't exactly recall, but basically say you eat 2,000 calories, you're going to need like 15 grams of fiber.
Yeah.
You're going to get that fiber through your, generally speaking. I mean, you can get through pasta and some whole grains, but you primarily want to get it through your fruits, vegetables, and legumes.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
um like your broccoli, spinach is pretty low in fiber, but kale is another good leafy green.
Hmm.
And then you've got your like apples, bananas, and then legumes like your man,
You got
beans,
beans, lentils.
lentils.
There's
That's
all
what I was
different
thinking
types of
of,
beans and
lentils.
lentils. We could
Yeah.
list off tons of them.
Yeah.
Check them out in the
Abs-
bulk bin. You'll see all kinds.
yeah,
Pick the
yeah.
ones that you like the way they look.
Yeah.
They're all good for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. To tell you the truth, I've never really counted my fiber intake.
Yeah.
I usually do it more intuitively. Like you can kind of feel it in your stomach. If you
Yeah.
eat too much fiber, you kind of get all bloated from it. Like a good bloating, like it's not like an unhealthy thing, but it's like
Yeah,
it takes up space in your stomach. It fills you up
exactly.
and it doesn't provide you with any calories. So I usually could tell if
Exactly.
I'm not eating enough fiber, if you quite frankly have a hard time taking a shit,
Yeah.
or if I'm eating too much fiber, I'll feel the bloating in my stomach, and I'm sure you can imagine what that results in.
Yeah. Takes a little while.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with anybody trying to lose weight, a high fiber diet's a good move. It's going to make your stomach feel fuller because it's basically taking up mass in your GI tract.
Mhm.
So it's going to make you feel satiated, even though it's not going to contribute any calories to
Yeah.
your intake.
Yeah. The way
But
I see
anyway,
fiber is it's like this brush that comes and
yeah,
cleans out the stuff that you don't want inside of there. It's like,
cleans you out.
yeah, it's like you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, but you got to eat your fiber to clean your insides.
Absolutely.
I think that's why there's not a lot of talk about fiber, because it's very like poop related,
Yeah,
like
I know.
it
People are
ties into that
uncomfortable
a
with that
lot.
topic.
Yeah. Well, we're letting them hear it today. So
Yeah. Gotta do it. Gotta
yeah.
do it to them.
Yeah. So do these micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, have any sort of role in our performance? Like if I don't eat vegetables and fruits, am I going to be able to perform properly? Like, am I going to be able to lift heavy and run fast? Or is this just something that's going to help me go to the bathroom and lead to health in the long run?
So yeah, these are important, for rebuilding your tissues. So alongside protein, these micronutrients are going to aid in your body's recovery from any
Hmm.
type of exercise. Because anytime you're putting your body through an exercise, you're putting it through stress. And I'm not talking about just psychological stress, I'm talking about physiological stress. So
So
your body,
it's not just the protein doing that. It's these micronutrients, you say?
yes. So the micronutrients are aiding building blocks in um, making sure your body is recovering fully. You need these micronutrients wouldn't be micronutrients if you didn't need them, like
Yeah.
uh, basically if you're too low in vitamin A for too long, you can actually go blind,
Oh
which is
wow.
like insane. But
Eat your
like,
spinach, guys.
yeah,
Come
get
on.
your carrots. But like, yeah, that like that's just like one example, and then
Yeah.
you've got your minerals, like you were talking about, like with your zinc and your magnesium and your iron's really important for your blood. So
Hmm.
any type of athlete is going to want to make sure they're getting adequate iron. You don't want to
Yeah.
get too much iron, because then you can get what's known as a toxicity, which
Hmm.
is and the annoying thing about a toxicity and a deficiency is they tend to show the same symptoms, like you're going to feel like shit
Really.
if you're deficient, you're going to feel like shit if you're toxic, you've had too much.
Yeah.
So
That
like
makes it
that's
kind
the
of
other
tough
thing.
because it's like it's implying that there's just the right amount of iron that you need, and
Exactly. And it's so
that's tough.
individual. It's
Yeah.
so individual. And for men and women, it's different. So it's just like so many like variables at play. Like
Yeah.
women, for example, like they have their menstrual cycle and they lose more blood on a regular basis than men. So they need more iron as a result. And a
Yeah.
lot of times for women, they'll be low in iron and cause them to feel like shit.
Hmm.
But but anyway, so I know for performance athletes, say, you're getting all of your vitamins and minerals, double check on your zinc and magnesium.
Yeah.
Zinc is going to play a role in hormone production, and for men specifically, testosterone.
Hmm.
And magnesium is a very important, what's the word I'm thinking of? Electrolyte.
Yeah.
So, and people don't think of magnesium. They think of their sodium, potassium, and water, but magnesium is also an electrolyte as well. So you want to make sure you're getting enough magnesium as well. It's also important for bone health,
Hmm.
making sure you have strong bones. That way, if you're a football
Yeah.
player, you want to have dense bones. So you're not
Yeah.
breaking a hard
Most
tackle or whatever.
definitely.
You don't want to break a bone. So,
Mhm.
so these are all things to consider
That's
for
why I
sure.
always tell people you got to eat your nuts and seeds because they're so mineral dense. Most
Yes.
mineral dense thing you could find, and they have all that stuff you're talking about: the zinc, the magnesium, the calcium.
Yep. and healthy fats as
Healthy
well. A lot of
fats and
those
some
nuts
protein
have,
too.
yep,
Yeah.
omega-3s. But a good way to check where you're at, if you're completely overwhelmed and thinking, oh my gosh, there's all these new vitamins and minerals that I didn't even know about, you can go to a doctor's office, and get blood work done. I don't think it's too
Yeah.
expensive either. They just draw a little bit of blood, and then they test it to see, how you're doing and all your different vitamins and minerals. And most of the time you'll get the green light. Maybe they'll tell you like, oh, you're low in zinc. You need to get a
Yeah.
little more zinc. And you can pick up a supplement, go
Yeah,
for a
it's definitely
trusted
a good
brand.
plan.
But yeah, that's a good way to kind of double check if you feel you're completely lost and don't know. Go get some blood work done.
So what about water? How is water
Yes.
intake going to change among these different populations?
Yes. So again, the sedentary person going to drink less water, but still probably more than you'd think. Even a sedentary person should shoot to get about a gallon of water a day. Depending on how big you are, it does change. Yeah, there you
Gotta have it
go,
down.
man. There you go. And again, that's one that you could Google. Again, you just be like, I weigh this much. How much water should I get per day? But for a more active person, I've seen, and especially the more protein, the more food you're eating, water is an important component in breaking down your macronutrients. Generally, you use water to as a one chemical to break down your macronutrients in your body. So just by the more food you're eating, the more water you're going to need to drink.
Yeah.
And so for like a very active 200-pound athlete, you might want to be closer to 2 gallons of water per day.
That's almost what I drink. Yeah, almost
Yeah.
2 gallons. People think it's so much, but it's just like habit for me now. I'm just like, oh, I ate all this food, and I gotta drink some water.
I would recommend. So an important thing is for every pound of body weight lost during exercise, and I'm not talking over the course of your entire exercise career. I'm just talking about in a training session, you lose, say, like you weigh in before your training session and you weigh in like 150, and then like at the end of your training session, you're like 158 or 148, you lost 2 pounds. You're going to need to drink 16 ounces of water per pound lost.
Okay, so you have to replace the weight that you lost directly with water because you're sweating and you're losing those fluids.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that makes sense. So the athletes are definitely going to need more water than the sedentary individual.
Exactly.
But that's not to say that if you're sedentary, you still should be drinking plenty of water. It's probably one of the single best things you could do for your health is just drinking some good, clean water.
Exactly.
And it's often overlooked. A lot of people will be dialing in on their nutrition, but then they're like, oh, wait, maybe I'm not drinking enough water. It often makes it hard for people to lose weight when they don't drink water.
Yep. And the more diuretics you're drinking, like, so if you're having caffeine on a regular basis, caffeine is a diuretic, meaning that it puts your kidneys into overdrive processing to expel the caffeine. So you're gonna lose more fluid when you have either caffeine. Caffeine's a diuretic, or alcohol is also a diuretic. There's a few others, but those are the two like most common, I would say.
Yeah.
So caffeine and alcohol, you're gonna lose like superfluous water. You're gonna have to drink more water to replenish your stores after having those. Yeah.
So water, definitely important. We can't overlook that one. So like we were saying about the other macronutrients, the carbs and the fats and the proteins, we said it was highly individual as to how much you should be consuming. But I think to a certain degree that it's the same with the water as well. Like, let's say for this example, you and I are the same body weight and very similar activity levels. Let's say we're both 200 pounds. But let's say I eat more salt than you eat.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to need more water to balance that out than you'll need. So a lot of it, like you said, depends on your diet, how much you're eating, and also like how much salt you have. If you drink or if you eat more salt, When you drink water, you're gonna hold on to that. I think of it like a
Yes.
camel, when you're eating some salty food, you eat that bag of chips, and then like if you're eating something salty and you just have to drink a ton of water after, like you feel like
Yeah.
you're endlessly thirsty.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is also a way that the water intake will be kind of individualized among each
Mm-hmm.
person. Is like, what are they eating? Not only
Yep.
how much they're eating, but like what is it that they're eating?
Mm-hmm. And another good thing to consider too, if you are eating a lot of salty food, you want to have more water for sure, but you also want to have more potassium because
Yes.
that's your other electrolyte. Um, you kind of want a certain balance of sodium and potassium. I don't think you need as much potassium as sodium, but you get
Hmm.
plenty of sodium in our Western diet already.
Yeah.
So you want to counteract that by getting as much potassium as you can.
Yeah.
It's going to lower your blood pressure. It's probably going to make you pee more, but that's not a bad
Mhm.
thing. Um, and it's gonna keep your energy level higher.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for the general fitness community in terms of eating a diet that facilitates optimal athletic performance? Like, if you had one thing to tell everyone, like, imagine the whole world's watching you right now. What do you want to tell them about eating?
The first thing I would say is know your goal. So know your intention because you're not going to be able to do anything the best way that you can do it if you don't know what you're doing it for. So you know that's really important. If you know that you're not someone who likes to exercise, you hate exercise, then then know you're sedentary, and then probably the second thing I would say is know your goal, and I don't know, just get to know yourself better. Like you want to count. Like I think that, like we talked about earlier, everyone should count their calories at least once. So if you know your goal, then you should know your calories and you should know what you're consuming. And a lot of people think they can recap what they've had the last couple of days. Maybe they can do that, but they don't know how many grams of protein they had and how many grams of carbs, how much water they drank. They don't keep track of any of that. So that would be the second thing. And the third thing I would say is I would just say, anything's really possible. Like whatever you want to get out of your athletics, your diet, if you know what you want and you know what you're doing right now, you've got all the tools you need to make the change to be what you want to be, do what you want to do. So that's what I would say is just get to know yourself, get to know your diet, and
Hmm.
bada boom, bada bing, the world's your oyster.
Yep. Yeah, I think that really ties in well because I feel like a big topic we are talking about today was like the individuality in our diet. So I really like what you were saying about just knowing yourself and knowing what you need to eat in order to perform your best. Like a lot of people seek out advice from other people, but what they got to realize is that's something that may have worked for them, that person they're asking, but it might not work on themselves.
Yep.
So it's very important to just understand yourself and what you need to put in your body. It's a very good message to the people. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you for your time today, Casey. I think we had a good discussion. A common theme that I want to highlight that has come up in this podcast numerous times is individuality. Everybody's diet is going to be different. You could have two people with very similar size and stature, and their diets are going to be very different. People's bodies react to certain foods different than others. People are going to need different amounts of carbs and fats and proteins depending on the type of activity they're doing. So, to summarize things, there's no one size fits all diet. There's no one diet that is going to make you the best athlete possible. Even the most elite athletes in the world are consuming vastly different diets. And it's so important to understand that your body is unique and individual to you, and you need to find what works for your body best. We can give you general advice. We can suggest that eating carbohydrates are good before and after training, and that you'll need protein throughout the day, but the amounts of these carbs and proteins and fats are going to differ among everybody. It's so important to understand that so that you can begin to understand what your body needs. You could do this by using MyFitnessPal, tracking your calories, and just understanding what you're putting in your body macronutrient wise. That being said, one of the most beneficial things you could do to optimize your performance, nutrition wise, would be to track your calories and your macros so that you have an understanding of what's going in your body. If you log your calories and macros and you don't know what any of that means, you can reach out to somebody who does, and I'm sure they'll be glad to help you. Personally, I love helping people do that. So if you want to go and enter your calories in on MyFitnessPal, you can send me a message with some screenshots from your MyFitnessPal, and I'd be glad to help you and make some suggestions that you can do to change up your diet so that you can perform better in the gym or on the track or whatever sport you're doing. If you want to contact me, you can reach out to me on social media. My Instagram handle is Mitchell_Gainz with a Z at the end. I'll put that in the description of this video and podcast. You can also find my YouTube channel, Mitchell Boris. There's plenty of nutrition and fitness information on there. Lastly, I would love if you reached out to me and gave me suggestions for what I could do on my podcast in the future. I'm open to any and all suggestions, so shoot them my way. You can send me an email, you could message me on Instagram, and you could just throw some ideas my way, and I'd be glad to take them into consideration. Episode 2 of Gainz-Thirty will be looking at the psychological aspect of optimizing your performance. We're going to take a look at some cognitive techniques that you can use to better hype yourself up or calm yourself down while you're performing so that you can perform at your best. Stay tuned, we'll be uploading that in the future, and thank you for watching.